Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fiber Broadband Association's Fiber for Breakfast. We're now in our 37th episode of 2022. But before we kick off, I'd like to thank our sponsors of Fiber for Breakfast, including our gold sponsors, Graybar and Betro. This morning, our good friend Jeff Hainan from the research firm Deloro issued a press release announcing that fiber to the home pond equipment revenue is up 19% year over year. Global spending on pond OLTs has reached a record of $1.3 billion in the second quarter of this year. Hainan also is quoted to say that the transition to fiber is clearly a worldwide phenomenon. He also reported that 10 gig XGS pond ONT shipments, ONT, that's part of on the side of the house, those shipments exceeded 1 million units in the quarter. It appears that cable access concentrator revenue dropped 4%, which isn't really too surprising as cable operators, as they start to shift more to fiber to the home deployments. At the FCC, it appears that Elon Musk and Starlink are contesting the FCC's decision to reject their $885 million RDOF award. We continue to applaud Chairwoman Rosenworcel's decisive decision to deny Starlink. This move by the FCC saved 640,000 families from being redlined from the nation's current investment in critical infrastructure with RDOF and BEAD funding, and they would have been forever relegated to the wrong side of the digital divide. We are confident the FCC will continue to hold the line, and we support them 100% on their decision. Earlier this week, NTIA released the latest version of the BEAD FAQs. The new updates start on page 59, so there's a lot of FAQs, and it provides an additional 16 pages of new questions and answers. This update provided some really useful information. One, it really reinforced the high cost thresholds needs to really be really high to prioritize fiber, which we like. Provided clarification on workforce on no union or prevailing wage, but you must report. And also confirmed that NTIA is going to wait on the FCC map challenges, among other things. So as you know, we had a wildly successful regional Fiber Connect workshop at the Copper Mountain Resort in Colorado a few weeks ago. It appears that all the records we set in Colorado are going to be broken with our upcoming fiber regional event in Columbus, Ohio on November 3rd. It is clear the people and leadership of Ohio really get it, and they are very serious about fiber broadband. So you're not going to want to miss it, so please register today. So today we have a very special Fiber for Breakfast with Scott Wallsten, the President and Senior Fellow of the Technology Policy Institute. Scott is a very thoughtful and insightful guy, so I know this is going to be a very fun and interesting session. But before I formally introduce today's guest, I'd like to introduce Trish Ehlers from our team, who's going to walk us through some housekeeping items.
Thanks so much, Gary, and good morning to everyone who's joined us today. Before I go over a few logistical items, I'd like to once again thank our Fiber for Breakfast Gold sponsors, Graybar and Vetro. And now if everyone would keep in mind that everyone is in listen mode only. To ask a question, simply type it into the question box located within your control panel on the right side of your screen. We'll host a Q&A session with our panelists at the end of today's webinar. This presentation is being recorded and will be available to members only on FBA's website within 24 hours. You can find the recording in the Events tab under the Fiber for Breakfast drop-down option. At the conclusion of the presentation, you'll be prompted to complete a very brief feedback survey. If you take a minute to do so, we really appreciate your input. I'll pass it back to Gary now to introduce our panelists and get us started. Gary?
Thanks, Trish, and good morning. I'm Gary Bolton, the President and CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association. I also wanted to mention we're going to have a great webinar today at 1 p.m. Eastern that is on supply chain, and we have created a series of industry webinars that are really targeted for the state broadband offices, NTIA, and also any of those service providers that are going to be applying for the BEAD grants. So please tune in today at 1 p.m. and learn about supply chain. So at Fiber for Breakfast last week, we met with Nate Denny, the Deputy Secretary of the North Carolina Department of Information Technology's Broadband and Digital Equity Division, to discuss broadband and digital equity in North Carolina. Lots going on in North Carolina, and we look forward to getting back together with Nate and his team in person in the first quarter, as Raleigh will be our location for our first Regional Fiber Connect workshop in 2023. Today's Fiber for Breakfast session is with Scott Wallsten, the president and senior fellow at the Technology Policy Institute. Scott is also a senior fellow at Georgetown Center for Business and Public Policy. He's an economist with expertise in industrial organization and public policy. He was the economics director for the FCC's National Broadband Plan and has been a lecturer in Stanford University's Public Policy Program, the director of Communications Policy Studies, and the senior fellow at the Progress and Freedom Foundation, a senior fellow at the AEI Brookings Joint Center for Regulatory Studies, and a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, and an economist at the World Bank, and a scholar at Stanford's Institute for Economic Policy Research, and a staff economist at the U.S. President's Council of Economic Advisors. Scott, you're a pretty busy guy. And he also holds a Ph.D. in economics from Stanford University. So with all that, welcome, Scott. Please, for our audience, type in your questions as we go, and we'll work them in our Q&A. With that, let's get things started. So Scott, can you tell us a little bit about the Technology Policy Institute and about what you're currently focused on? Probably maybe a good place to start is your blog. The FCC broadband maps will be wrong, but it was always going to be that way.
Right. Well, thanks, Gary. Thanks for having me, and to the Fiber Broadband Association for having me. Also, I like that I'm coming on a week after someone from North Carolina because I grew up there. So, if you need any information about North Carolina through the 1980s, I might be able to add some insights what it was like to be at least in high school then, if that's useful. So, the Technology Policy Institute is we study, as you might imagine from our name, technology policy, and we're all economists, which makes us a little bit different from some other places. And in particular, we do mostly a lot of empirical work. We work with data, and we cover lots of topics. Broadband is one, and within broadband, we work on universal service issues. We've done that for a long, long time. And the effectiveness of different programs, and we work on. I have a major project on privacy. We do antitrust work. We've done work on piracy and intellectual property. We have a big conference every summer in Aspen. We just had this past August. I think went really well. And so we do a lot of things. I think we have a good group, and I really enjoy it. So in terms of the piece that I wrote, which was on the FCC's maps. So before I say anything about them, I think it's important to point out that the FCC, I think, is doing actually a really, really great job. This is a hard project that Congress gave them, and by all accounts, they are working as hard as anyone could imagine you could work, and really just doing a fantastic job. So I want any criticisms that I make to be with it, with that understanding that caveat, because it's not criticizing the FCC or the people working on it, because they are just amazing. But of course, that doesn't mean that it's all going to go well. And one thing is that I think too many people have this belief that somehow we'll get this map and it will correct all of the problems with the existing 477 coverage data. And I don't know that that's true. Every data set has error in it. That's just the way it is. And in particular, this map will have errors because it's always changing. And awards are already going out, not BEAD awards, but from states and cities and so on. And so as soon as this map is finished, they'll have to add in the areas that awards were given to update that. And so it's, this challenge process that they have is important and will have to continue pretty much, I think, forever. And maybe it's even wrong to call it a challenge process because that sort of implies an adversarial system. And sometimes I'm sure it will be, but it doesn't have to be. It's that's got to be an inherent part of what's going on. But I think we're trading in some sense, I believe, disaggregation for accuracy, possibly. It might be easier to have, when you aggregate up to some level, whether it's census block or bigger, you may have less error overall, except you can't go to a very small level. And now we're trying to go to individual points. And so that gives you more precision, but it's precision, it may be precision with more error. And that's going to be hard to deal with. And like I said, it's not a criticism of what they're doing because Congress told them to do this, but it's going to be a very difficult and ongoing problem. So, but that said, I mean, this is we hope that it'll be better than 477, and we'll see. The challenge process is going to be exceedingly important and probably difficult.
So when you look at just the census block approach, the big issue is these census blocks can be huge, right? I mean, either they can be very small geographically but have a lot of people, or they could be very large geographically and have very few people. But the issue is you serve one person in that census block and then you get a check mark, and so that's where the issue. That's why we went down to single location.
No, that's right, and that was absolutely right, and that was the reason for going to a single location, and that really is going to a single location is the only way to deal with that kind of aggregation problem. You might be able to do something like, instead of saying that a block is covered, if you have one subscriber, you could say the share of households in the block that's covered. That would have been an improvement, but a different sorts of challenges. One interesting thing though about the maps that I don't think has really been discussed at all is that the purpose of the maps is for NTIA to decide how much money every state will get, right? And then the states are not obligated to use that map. Well, there's no reason to believe that the error on census blocks is bigger in some places, bigger or smaller in some places than in others, which means that it's possible that after all this work, the share of areas that are unserved as calculated from the new map is exactly the same as from 477, because it only matters if the bias is different in different areas, and we don't know that that's true. So, but we don't want to lose all of this work though, and so I think it's really important that the states use these maps. Now states will have their own information too, that hopefully will be part of the challenge process, and they can incorporate it into the maps. But if the only thing this map is used for is to allocate the money, that would be a huge waste and lost opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, so that's one of the things that we really struggle with is, I mean, first of all, I think it's a little bit brilliant that if you don't submit your your information for the FCC's broadband data collection, one, you can't participate in the BEAD funding, and two, you can't participate in the challenge process, which really kind of is a pretty good incentive to make sure that all the service providers put their data in. But as each state, and so these states know that their share of that $42 billion is really going to depend on, what the new FCC maps say. And so many states are doing their own mapping, so they have a baseline to say, hey, when they see the FCC, is they going to have as many unserved and underserved as they believe they have in their state to make sure they get their fair share. So there will be an opportunity for the states to be able to vet that and say, okay, if our maps say we should be getting a larger allocation, for each state to make sure that they get their fair share.
There is, and it's of course very important, but it also creates sort of a strange incentive, right? Because the more unserved areas you have, the more money you get. So states have an incentive to show that they have as much unserved area as possible, which creates the potential for gaming. And in the worst case scenario, you have a race to the bottom where everyone wants to show that they have no service at all. which obviously would be ridiculous. But there is going to be this issue that states have an incentive to show as much unserved area as possible. The FCC is going to have to be very rigorous about the challenge process to deal with that incentive.
Well, I mean, the other check you have though is service providers, because if a service provider is serving an area and the state claims that it's unserved, that service provider has the opportunity then to say whoa, whoa, whoa. And so again, there's a lot of checks and balances. So I think this can be self-leveling.
Yeah, well, we'll see. And right, and like I said, I think, I mean, the FCC is really doing a good job with all of this. But these are all kind of challenges that they'll have to kind of deal with as they come.
Yeah. So one of the questions, let me see if I understand this. So we were able to only match 75 to 80% of the fabric. Any information, does that indicate, is that typical? Is that what you're seeing?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know about the underlying fabric itself. I mean, right now it's these broadband serviceable locations, which is a little bit different from the challenge process that will happen later, right? And actually, sort of one little gripe I have is that the fabric doesn't seem to be available to anybody except for governments and ISPs. And I'm not sure I see any reason for that. I don't know why they're excluding third parties. But it's not surprising to me that that's the kind of result people would get when they start comparing it, because of the this error issue that I said. Error is inherent in this kind of information. And what they're saying, that they could match only 75%, we're starting to get a view of what the error is going to look like. And hopefully, mostly it won't be, the people will be able to match more than that, but it's going to be that kind of information that tells us how much error is in there and how difficult it's going to be to correct. We've built our own mapping tool, and I don't even like to call it mapping, because so what's important is really the data analytics. So we built this platform that lets us incorporate any broadband data that exists. So we've pulled in all the public data. We can include proprietary information if we were to build out a separate system, and it lets you merge data and combine it at any level. And we even have sort of built-in regressions and time series and all kinds of things. And a tool that we are finishing up right now is something that will allow you to look at different layers of information and identify when they conflict with each other. And that's going to be important. I mean, people sort of see these maps and they see layering, but those are just pictures. And you've got to be able to do more than that. And so that's what we're trying to do, because some of it is, it depends on definitions, right? And some of it's just probabilistic. You don't know this stuff for sure. We have this idea that it's possible to know exactly what exists at any given location. And I don't think a lot of people will know that this idea of a census of locations or service areas kind of comes from when the US Census did a census of telephones in the late 19th century. They just counted them like we count people every 10 years. Economic data has progressed so far beyond that approach in every other area of the economy. The Bureau of Economic Analysis and the BLS, they do very rigorous surveys, and that's how we understand the economy. This idea of counting things is just outdated and, in my opinion, absurd. We shouldn't be doing, again, not a criticism of the FCC, because they're doing what Congress is telling them to do. But we should be doing, very extensive, well-designed surveys using the skills and expertise of BEA and BLS. But that's, for whatever reason, is just a non-starter. But if we were willing to open up our data collection processes to something like that, I think we could learn a lot more. It wouldn't have to worry about, exactly, does this house have it? Does this house not have it? And so on. So that's just a little side rant that I've been ranting about for a long time.
So if someone wanted to use your tools, where would they find those?
So you can go to tpibroadband.com and you can sort of get a little taste of it. But a lot of the things that we have are sort of on the back end that we can do ourselves. So if you want, I mean, we have this little explainer video of like a data downloading tool. You can show it if you'd like. It's a couple minutes. But the thing to remember when watching it is that I made it, and I don't know how to make these these explainer videos. And when it pops out a spreadsheet at the end, it was really for our own use. So the spreadsheet, we don't round the numbers or anything. But it kind of gives a sense of the kind of how easy it is to get data out of it when it would normally take you a really, really long time to find, download, and merge the data. So if you want to show that, you can, but don't judge me for my video skills. As a broadband professional, you frequently need access to lots of information like availability, adoption, or even more specific things like how much RDOF money in Area 1. And you probably need it for different types of geographies and years, depending on what you're doing. Sometimes for a state or states, sometimes for counties, congressional districts, census blocks, and more. Putting this together takes time and some computer savvy. You've got to identify the data sets, where they're hosted, figure out how to download what you want, and combine it all. It takes hours of your time, or you hire someone else to do it. Our tool can do it for you in just a few seconds. Let me show you how. So to get the data you want, you go to the DPI Broadband Data Explorer. You select the geographic level you're interested in. You can see we have almost any political designation you can think of. Let's leave it on state for now. And now you go to the data that you're interested in. Let's say you want the share of households with broadband access. And then you have to define what you mean by broadband access. So the default is 25 down, 3 up. But these numbers you can change to be anything you want. You can even add another one so that you can do comparisons. So let's add 120. So we also know the share of households with access to broadband at 100 down and 20 up. Now let's say you also want to know at the same time about adoption. So let's select the American Community Survey share of households that are broadband subscribers. And you want to know something about the digital divide. So you can select households with under $20,000 a year in income that have broadband. And let's also add the RDOF support. That was one for the state. Next, you select the time period you want. You can select all the available years or the most recent year only. This last option is if you've selected something that will be a very large data set and you want to change the way the data is shaped. Normally, you can just leave this unchecked. Then you click download and you wait for the computer to do all of the relevant merges in the background. And then it will provide you with a data set to download. So then you open the downloaded file in Excel or any program that can read comma delimited text files. And you see you have the state, the share of households that subscribe to broadband, the share of households with incomes under $20,000 a year that subscribe to broadband, the RDOF assignment in that state, the share with access to 25.3, and the share with access to 120.
Yeah, so now all you need to do is my students would take that and put it into a visualization tool like Tableau or something like that to.
Yeah, exactly. That's the idea for people who need this kind of thing frequently. And that's just some of the data we have. And we're really eager for the FCC's data because, like you saw, the availability, of course, right now is just 477 with all of the problems that we talked about. And so, we can incorporate any other data. But this is sort of a fun thing to do. It looks like we only have a few minutes left. Do you want to talk a little bit about the paper Greg and I wrote so I can
Yeah, so why don't we get that? Just before we get there, there was someone that put in that in the FCC's BDC users guide, page 98, on who can access the fabric data. It says other entities can view coverage by file and provider, and they're asking, has anyone at the defined other entities been successful in accessing that? So you said, Scott, you weren't, but
right. I would love to know the answer to that because I've seen similar things, right? It says that it will be open to everybody, including third parties. But this first part, the fabric, where the underlying fabric, where it's just identifying broadband serviceable locations in the FCC's releases, it says very specifically it only mentions governments and ISPs. It doesn't say nobody else can, but it doesn't mention them. So I also would love to know if third parties are able to.
Yeah. Hey, so let's jump into, so you and Scott, or excuse me, you and Greg Wallsten wrote a research paper, Maximizing BEAD's Broadband Reach. You want to kind of give our audience kind of a summary of some of the key tenets of that?
Sure. So this is, I wrote this with Greg Wallsten, who is an economist at the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research and the director of their Stanford's public policy program. We do a lot of work on these kinds of issues. So, one of the things is we've been big proponents of reverse auctions, which I know people really don't like at the moment. But the problems with RDOF stemmed not from it being a reverse auction, but from the eligibility criteria, right?
Qualifying the bidder after the fact doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly, right. And this will sort of get into the next point that we want things to be technologically neutral. We want to encourage new technologies and new entrants to come in, but we don't want the government to be taking all of the risk on that. And so, we think it should be designed in a way that the provider itself takes more of the risk. And so, for example, you don't get any money until you've got something built that you can show and you're starting to provide service. And so, I guess for Starlink, the example, let Elon Musk bid, but don't give him a dime until they can show something. Why would we subsidize Elon Musk's risk? It's crazy. But in my view, we shouldn't be excluding things like that. So the other part, and this is where hopefully everybody will start to dislike me. I really think we need to focus. We need to have technological neutrality, and focusing on one technology like fiber is a mistake. Not to dismiss the importance of fiber, because everybody knows that it's a key tool no matter what. I think even Starlink, people wouldn't deny that. But I think it's a mistake to focus only on fiber, and the kind of the right way to think about it is what are what's the net present value of the costs and benefits of installing something, and that also could include how long it'll take to get service up and running.
Yeah, and so Scott, you and I always have a good debate on this, but I don't think of fiber as a technology, it's infrastructure, and BEAD is about infrastructure. So if you look at the FCC programs, even from the National Broadband Plan, when you guys wrote that was defined 1 megabit as broadband, about 12 years ago. And so we end up this race to the bottom, right? Because when you just say you got to meet a minimum speed of 4 megabits down and 1 megabit up, and then we subsidize the same areas again when it's 10.1, and then again when it's 25.3, and again when it's 100 by 20. And you're just basically, what we did is we subsidized a lot of DSL. And so now we're going to, if we subsidize fixed wireless or LEO satellites, then you're just going to constantly be spending more and more money, versus what the administration's trying to do here with the BEAD program is actually put in critical infrastructure. And this is, what's going to last for generations to come. And so if we're able to put fiber in, then, wireless can take advantage of that with 5G. Everybody, we can take advantage of that for smart grid modernization. We can take advantage for, you're building on this for public safety. So all the things are being built on this critical, foundation.
Well, so, I think there's several answers to that. One is it's important to take into account consumer demand. And if you're putting in something that people don't actually value, then that's wasted resources. And those resources could have been used to provide broadband elsewhere. Also, I think it's a mistake to say that investing in fiber means that you've done something forever, because fiber needs to be replaced too, just like any other technology. And I think people have gotten this idea that once you put in fiber, it stays there forever, but it's got a life of 25 years, right?
No, it's
and
100 years or more.
Yeah. I don't know. Well, Mark Gansey, who's the CEO of Digital Bridge, and worked a lot of this, was saying that these things often need replacement after 25 years. So, I mean, you might say the conduits and so on have, that's much more of a permanent thing. But so. I mean, it seems to me the right answer is always, how do you maximize the net benefits? And we haven't done that. I mean, we haven't even tried to. We haven't done any of the calculations.
All right, so agree to disagree. But hey, we're out of time, Scott. And I really appreciate all the work that you do at the Institute and your contributions really to help move our industry forward, and really loved your insights on things. So thanks everyone for joining us today, and look forward to getting back together next Wednesday, where we're going to be discussing millions left behind. BEAD isn't enough to close the digital divide, with Larry Thompson, the CEO of Vantage Point, as he discusses his somewhat controversial white paper, The Cost of Bringing Broadband to All. So you guys aren't going to want to miss that, and we'll go see you guys again next Wednesday. So thanks all.
Thanks, Gary.